Hello, a very warm welcome to the Creative Resistance Podcast. I'm Scott Cassidy, and we've not been dropping episodes as often as I would like at the moment. I'm in the middle of a house move, work is chaotic, it's the school holidays, and there's a load of stuff going on. But for this episode, I was lucky enough to chat to one of my absolute favourite guests so far. His name is Lucas Fothergill. Lucas is a writer and a documentary filmmaker. His work has appeared in national newspapers and magazines. He's developed and helped produce documentaries for the BBC, Sky, Netflix and others. And in this episode, we take a deep dive into his book, Everyone, Everywhere, 21 Stories of Mixed Race Britain. Now, it's a book that starts in the current time, tells a series of short stories, portraits if you like, of individuals, some that you'll know, some that you won't, and it works back over a few hundred years, knitting these stories together into a narrative that shines a light on injustice and prejudice, but that is absolutely shot through with joy and hope and beauty. It's a cracking conversation. Lucas is an absolute gem of a guy. I will put links to everything in the show notes. Please get in touch with him, please buy the book, and enjoy. Hello to Lucas Fothergill, and a very warm welcome to the Creative Resistance Podcast. How are you?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Scott. I'm doing very well. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. I think you are my first transatlantic guest that has been on the podcast. So just for some context, as usual, I am just outside Edinburgh in Scotland. Can you tell the listeners where you are, Lucas?
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. And thank you so much for having me. I've loved listening to earlier episodes of this with Nadine Shah and with Kevin. And so I'm so really excited to join. My name's Lucas. I'm a writer. I just published my first book, which I think we're going to be talking a little bit about. But as my day job, I'm also a documentary filmmaker. And I currently work for a company called Grain Media, which is a 2-time Oscar-winning documentary company. And I'm development producer there, so I develop lots of ideas. But the thing that will be of interest to Creative Resistance listeners is that Grain often makes documentaries that they have a progressive sort of tilt to them, and they always have impact campaigns. So we always make documentaries that are trying to spread a positive social message or lead to some kind of positive action or social good. So I think that's what would be of interest to your listeners. Although that's my day job, and I'm really here to talk about the book. I don't want to promote my company. They have all the promotion they need already. They're good.
Yeah. Do you know what though? I'd love to dig into a little bit. We'll definitely chat about the commonalities between that job, your day job, and the book as well. So yeah, just to give some context to the listeners. 100%. So Lucas's book, it's called Everyone, Everywhere, 21 Stories of Mixed Race Britain. And mate, it's brilliant. Honestly, I said to you in the email before we were chatting, like, there are tales in there that are rooted in trauma. There's some really dark moments. There's, grotesque kind of prejudice and, everything else that comes along with that. But my overriding feeling when reading that was one of absolute hope and optimism and joy. And it's awesome. So I wonder if you would start by just giving the listeners a kind of overview of the book. And I'd love to know more about what drove you to tie these individual stories into a kind of cohesive, single piece of art.
Absolutely, no, and thank you so much for reading it, first of all, and thank you so much for your kind words, because that means so much. It really does. So really quickly, what is the book? So it's Everyone, Everywhere: 21 Stories of Mixed Race Britain. I spent 5 years interviewing, researching and writing this. It's a non-fiction book that starts in the present day with a series of interviews with compelling people, each facing an immense challenge of some kind in their lives. And then each chapter we slowly unfurl backwards in time. So we start in the present day and then we go back over 100 years. And as we slowly go back further in time, you meet this cast of incredible historical figures that I'd love for you to learn more about. And each chapter is challenging in many ways and very emotional. But like you say, Scott, there's a lot of joy in there and a lot of love in there as well. And I think, and when you're mentioning there's lots of tragedy in there in some ways, but there's also lots of hope. And that's 100%. Was my title aim. And I think there is a sort of there's a stereotype about narratives around mixed race people. Some people might have heard of the tragic mulatto stereotype and things like that. Is that in media, especially historically in Britain, many decades ago, the depiction of mixed families and mixed people was that they often failed, or there was something tragic or sad about them. And I just wanted to write something and share stories of people where that wasn't the case at all. Where there's, and in this book, there's stories of suffragettes and spies, like people like fighting for something. But there's also stories with footballers and funnier stories with broadcasters and things. And there's stories of incredible love stories too. And it's just like there's this multitude of experiences that I wanted to try and capture. But I should preface this by saying that, yes, while there's 21 different individuals in this, as we slowly move backwards in time, you can never fully capture or represent the experience or the history of being mixed race. So this is very much, it's scratching the surface. And I hope that if you read this very short book, it would encourage you to want to look even more and see that there's this fascinating yet neglected thread of British history and people out there. But if we paid a little bit more attention to it, I think you'd get so much out of it. And you don't need to be mixed to enjoy or get something out of this. And hopefully that seems to be what you're saying, Scott. But you're a very nice man as well.
No, 100%, 100%. That's what I'm saying. And I think the other thing, like, you've obviously spoken about these other people, some famous and well known, some not. But throughout that, I think your own story comes to the front as well. Like, you start with a tale about how someone assumed you were Egyptian, and kind of move on from there. And I think that must have been. Do you feel like you learned about yourself as you were writing this and pulling it together?
I learned so much. Honestly, that was part of the idea for doing this. I'd always been talking with, when I was growing up, I had one really, one of my best friends who was mixed as well. And we always talked about wanting to learn more about this ourselves. When we were growing up, we were like, when London 2012 happened, Jess Ennis and all these figures, and the way that being mixed was written about in the media at the time, it was as if being mixed was like a brand new thing. But it's like, of course it's not. As we see in the book, there's been mixed people in Britain for well over 1,000 years. There's like a lovely little story right at the end about a couple in the northeast. But I just always wanted to learn more. I think the thing as well is that there's lots of things about me that I don't like. I don't like how I look. I don't like my face that much. I don't like aspects of my personality. So glad that it's a podcast that's not visual and don't have the face in it. There's lots of things I don't like about myself, but all of my life I've always just loved that I'm mixed. I just love my parents and my family and their stories of how they came together, the stories of our various family members. I'm just so proud to be mixed, white and mixed and Asian. That's just something I've just always loved about myself, and I always wanted to explore that, but explore the history of it.
Yeah,
lots of the very good writing and podcasts and documentaries and things that come out today that are great. They often only talk about identity in the present day, and that's totally valid. But I really wanted to talk about that as well as delving into the history of it, because I feel like that's the part that doesn't get as much attention. And that, and when by telling these 21 stories that slowly move back in time, you see the context that all of these people are living in, and you see the structural forces that are impacting their lives in various ways. Like, for example, I never knew that in the early 20th century, that if a British woman wanted to marry a foreign man, that she would be risking losing her British citizenship. So that's an example of in the early 20th century, and that act wasn't reformed until 1948. And I think that's an example of a structural force trying to stop you from having interracial mixed race families and couples. That's an actual, I thought that's just shocking. I couldn't believe that. And I think that's just like a part of our history that we just don't know about, or a little bit in the back of this book. But I just think that's an example of the kind of structural issues that people were trying to battle against and fight against. And I think that's the thing that gives me hope, is that when you look back at all of this stuff, sometimes some parts of our history almost feel cyclical, especially when it comes to riots and when you see things going on in Belfast and so on, and recently, sometimes you feel that feels very similar to the riots we had in 1919 for the exact same reasons, the exact same reactions. But then, while some parts of our history feel cyclical, there are other parts of it that feel that are 100% bending in a good direction, that things are getting better. And I feel like sometimes when you're reading the news, if you are as addicted to the news as I am, for all the sins of that, you just sometimes can feel like everything's become so bleak recently. But when you look back, doing the research of this book, and when you're to go back to your question, I'm rambling now.
No, it's all good. It's all really fascinating stuff.
Go back, it gives you some hope when you go back, because you feel like things have improved. Like for just that one example, that law, of course, is not in place at all. It got to a point now where having an interracial relationship, having a mixed race family, mixed race children, being mixed, it's just a totally ordinary thing. As Trevor Phillips said on Rest History podcast, it's seen as something that's ho-hum and ordinary.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing. And it is ordinary. And that's the great thing. But for a long time British history, that wasn't the case for people.
I think as well.
I don't know. You were shocked when you heard about that.
Totally shocked. But I think,
yeah,
probably naively shocked, to be honest, because it's not surprising. I think one of the things that shines through in the book is that these sort of individual stories are often playing out as people are navigating like huge, systemic, kind of systematic sort of machines and systems that are put in place to make it difficult, and that the kind of, we'll discuss this a little bit further on, but that systems that are designed to divide. And I think that's, what shines through in this book is that these individual stories are often like people that cut through and then pave the way for other people to come after them as well, which is incredible. One of the things I was interested in, despite, the stretches of time, industry, the backgrounds of all the different people that you speak about, were there any sort of invisible threads that tied the tales together? And I suppose I'm interested in how you selected which stories to tell. How did you find the people whose tales you wanted to kind of tangle together?
Yeah, so I think there's 21 that made it into this the final. It makes it sound like a talent show, like a game show or something. It's not that at all. Well,
you are publishing Simon Cowell. Yeah.
I know, you can tell I work in TV and documentaries. God, but I interviewed close to 50 people, and then those are the interviews, and then there's just dozens and dozens of historical figures that I was fascinated by. But the crucial thing for why these 21 is that it needed to move along that timeline. There are a lot of people naturally with the interviews. Of course, they have to be live, so you run out of people to speak to halfway through the timeline. And but what threads them all together, I think, is that all of these people seem to be just searching for something. I think that always makes for a great story. Because there are other books about mixed race identity that, if you're interested in, I'd encourage you to read. But they're not necessarily a story there, and that's when when my background working in documentaries ties into this, is that I feel like the best way to engage people is with the heart rather than the head first. I want to engage the head afterwards. I hope we engage the head. It is a book, but we want to start with the heart, and that means like something that is moving and emotional, and that's at the heart of good documentaries as well. If, like me, you've watched lots of bad documentaries, you'll know the ones that don't engage your heart first. And all these stories, all these people want something. It might be that they've been separated from their long lost families and they're fighting to get back in touch with them. You mentioned like systemic systems that are keeping people apart. So there's lots of very moving family reunions in this book, or people are searching for some kind of goal that they're trying to achieve. They're trying to reconnect with something, or they're trying to do everything they can to be in love with someone and start a family with someone, even if people are trying to stop them, whether it be the government or their own families. So I felt that was always the basis of that each chapter is a really compelling story in its own right, was the main thing. But that threaded through all of that is an exploration of history and identity alongside that story. And crucially as well, I wanted the book to be as short as I possibly could make it. A self-inflicted rule, just so that people would actually read it. John Ronson the other day was saying that, and he's a successful writer, was saying that it's a miracle if you can get anyone to buy a book these days. So on that note, would anyone like to buy this book?
Links will be in the show notes. I highly recommend it.
I just thought that I understand that maybe people have got so much to do. Lots of people are going to be like, why would I want to read this right now? But if you're someone that is really interested in learning more about neglected parts of British history, and if you want to learn about identity, but also just read a series of really amazing stories about fascinating people overcoming various challenges, and it's a very short book, then I hope that is of real interest to people. That's what I wanted to do, something that...
Not just that though, Lucas. I think it's a book that is... I feel like it's needed, and I think it is a real... excuse the language, but it's a real fuck you to the kind of narrative that we see strewn out across the media at the moment, where it does feel very divisive. It feels like people are looking for reasons to other each other, to cause division within community. And actually what this is, it's a really human way of getting across the importance of an open and fair and kind of welcome society. It's it's needed. And actually we're constantly hearing about people's attention spans at the minute being limited, but again, the beauty with this book, because each sort of chapter, if you want to call them chapters, is like a portrait. You can dip in and out, and you can read, little bits at a time. And actually, I think that in itself was lovely. You mentioned Belfast earlier, and I was actually I was in Belfast with work this week, and I read this on the plane going over, and I was dipping in and out of it. And then I was there, and I work for a visual impairment charity, and I was collecting a couple of people to go to an event. And man, it was brutal. I picked one chap up and literally lived in a street that was covered in stop the boats, locals only, graffiti, boarded up shops, boarded up windows, and it was a really kind of brutal slap in the face and a realization that this stuff is real and it's scary. And actually, I was going to ask this question later, but I'll go into it now. One of the sections from the early 1900s, which I think the chapter is just called Riots, and you kind of lay out a series of quotes from people who were around at the time, and there's some newspaper headlines and stuff. That could have been written last month. Exactly. The fact that we are still facing up to the same issues, that same sort of hatred and division is still being sown by people, I think is just terrifying, and really scary.
Yeah. And just quickly for any listeners that don't know about the 1919 riots, essentially it's that just after the First World War ends, there's housing shortages and there's a rise in unemployment. And at the exact same time, people are stoking these anti-immigrant sentiments, and these lead to racially motivated riots that break out across all of Britain. They're in Glasgow, they're in Wales, they're in various parts of England, London and Liverpool and things like that. And this chapter, basically, I just removed my voice from it entirely, and the entire chapter is just in a documentary work style. It's archive only, so it's just other people's voices, just back to back to back to back to back. Sort of a mix of sort of newspaper and first person testimony from the time as people are witnessing their towns just sort of overrun by rioters. And you're 100% right, Scott, is that when I hadn't heard about that before I started writing about this book from my naivety, and it feels like that happens time and time again in the present day for the exact same reasons. And that's when sometimes history feels a bit cyclical, which is the bleakest the bleakest thing ever. But I do want to add in as well, and you touched on this at the start, that ultimately that reading this through the history does fill me with hope. When there's other aspects of the history, it does fill me with hope, and that's what I wanted the book to sort of end on as a note. And you sort of touched on it there as well, is that even though we've got these really scary things going on right now, that Britain, I think, is still such a fantastic place.
Yeah.
I love the UK, and I love it so much. And ultimately, its history is of one of it's the story of a coming together of peoples. It's a coming. The very idea of the UK is a coming together of peoples. It's four nations, and people have been coming to Britain for over 1,000 years. Like, that's part of our national story, and that's something that I wanted to celebrate, and I wanted to humanize those people that have done so. And of course, that I'm so invested in that because my own family, my mum's from Sri Lanka. She came here when she was just 18 because of the civil war in Sri Lanka at the time. And I'm obviously very invested in, and my wife is not from the UK; she's from Canada. So I'm obviously very invested in humanizing people that move. And there's a brilliant book called Migrants by Sam Miller, and he sort of traces the history of human migration, and it's brilliant if anyone's interested in it.
Oh, I'll link to that in the notes as well. There's a fantastic reading list that you put in the book as well, which I'll definitely chuck some of that.
Someone asked me the other day. They said, "Did you actually read all the books now?" I'm like, "Of course I read the books that I've referenced in them." Or did you just put in a random bunch of books? I don't know. There's a great line that Sam Miller says, and he's basically like that. It's the single most like natural part of the human story is that humans move around, and there are certain individuals that are prominent in the British media, unfortunately, would like you to think otherwise, but that's wrong.
Totally. Just out of interest, is there the same narrative being spun in Canada? Is there the same attempts by a right-wing media or political kind of force to kind of divide and do the same thing there, or are we looking at something quite specific to the UK at the moment?
Yeah, so just quickly, just for the listeners, so I'm in Canada right now. My wife is Canadian, as I mentioned, and while we wanted to go on an adventure, she also felt it was very important to be near her parents when we had a baby. So I have a 4-month-old son. So I'm speaking to you from Canada today.
At 6 a.m., just to chuck that in there, at 6 in the morning.
It's 6 in the morning. I had a few pints last night as well. So, if I feel a little bleary, if I feel slow to anyone, then please don't message me to say so. But we're coming back to the UK, but we have a 4-month-old son we're just taking care of right now. Does Canada feel this? No, I'd say it doesn't. I'd say the political situation in the UK feels much more heightened and much closer to this kind of things going on in America than Canada does, even though Canada's shares the world's longest border with America.
That's good to hear.
It doesn't feel heightened in that way.
Oh, good, because
there was the beginnings of because Canada is sort of framed as being a sort of very friendly place to immigrants. That's sort of the image it projects. I say it's a different experience depending on where you come from in the world. I have friends from Venezuela and from Egypt that live here in Canada that have had a much tougher immigration experience than I have coming from the UK. So I'd say that there's the experience is completely different depending on where you come from. So obviously there's gigantic privilege being a British person coming to Canada. But I know just to summarize, while there were the stirrings of like the consensus moving away from being so pro-immigration in the Canadian media and polls and things like that at the start of the election last year, because of Trump, the conversation just moved completely away from that. There were stirrings because there were like the housing there was a housing crisis, and then people starting to blame immigrants, and as they seem to do. But it's not. The UK is a much more heightened political
kind of post-Brexit thing, I think, as well, isn't it? Yeah, definitely.
We just have the UK has figures that stir this stuff up much more than there are in Canada, unfortunately. Like, there's no Rupert Lowe's or Nigel Farage like figures in Canada, and Canada also is very much like still the two dominant parties take up all the majority of the votes. There's like a third progressive party called the NDP, who actually got into the opposition once, which is really interesting, as a third party to get into opposition, but they sort of got blitzed away at the most recent election. I don't know if. But we won't get into Canadian politics.
No, I could easily take us off on tangents and speak about Scottish politics and everything else. Let's not. Let's focus on everyone everywhere. Let's focus on the book.
Yeah, we could get that bit out. For anyone I just put to sleep.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think it's really interesting, and it does. I think the book plays out, or the book has been launched whilst this kind of division stuff's playing out. But you said there about holding on to that hope, and they can enjoy it. How intentional was it that you rooted the kind of these tales in love, joy, and resilience, or was that just what came out as you were gathering the information?
That's such an important thing to me for that to be featured, and that I wanted this book to be full of hope and joy. I wanted it to be entertaining, and I wanted it to be, where appropriate and in places, to be funny as well, as alongside telling stories that are incredibly challenging. Some people discussing some of the hardest experiences that they've gone through. They're exploring aspects of their identities that they've wrestled with and have caused them all sorts of pain in certain ways. And I think including all of that is a good way to describe what it is to be a person. I think that's what everyone goes through. Like that, if you were just telling really difficult stories, or you were just telling lovely love stories, then you wouldn't be telling the truth. And that's why as you move chapter to chapter, the tone sort of is maybe a little jarring at times. But I like that. I like the sort of whiplash of that. You go from one story to the next, and it's just completely different experience in a completely different tone. And that's just part of being a person. But I wanted to thread hope through it as much as possible. That was definitely an aim. I wanted you to sort of... Yeah, please.
No, I was just going to say you've absolutely nailed that as well, and I think the humour bit as well that you mentioned. I think there's some pages where you're reading this like really serious kind of like heavy story, and then you've got these sort of footnotes in at the bottom where you sort of answer a question or have a little quip, and I think that kind of there's bits where I probably laughed out loud at some of the footnotes which relate to some of the serious stuff up above. So I think that balance is really lovely. And it chops and changes from story to story. So it's really effective, actually. That kind of whiplash effect you described really works.
Yeah. Oh, that's very sweet of you. Thank you, Scott. Yeah. You're a very nice man. You've also got a beautiful voice. Do you know that? Has anyone said that yet?
It has been said, but I find it very difficult to listen to myself. So yeah, it's
no. Me too. I've got a horrible nasally voice. So sorry to everyone.
Also,
I've got hay fever as well. It must be.
You started this by saying, yeah, I don't like how I look, which made me think everyone is now going to be that doesn't know you is going to be Googling Lucas Fothergill.
Yeah. And you're like, how ugly is this man?
Not at all, just to be clear.
I wasn't fishing there, but I wasn't fishing for it.
Love it. Everyone's going to be Googling going, who are these guys? What did they look like?
Yeah, I always do that to people when I listen to a podcast. I always want to know what they look like.
Totally.
Although I'm glad this is audio only. Everything's moving to video now at podcasts. Podcasts is becoming TV. I'm glad this is audio only.
I stick it as audio only. On occasion I've used like a couple of video clips for social media, but I'm trying to keep it as audio, despite people saying, no, it'll never work. But some of my favourite podcasts are audio only. Like I listen to Blind Boy podcast a lot. I don't know if you listen to that, which is just incredible. Audio only.
Yeah.
And it's just something. I listen to podcasts when I go for a walk. Not sitting watching my phone yet another time. I spend enough time in front of the screen. So,
yeah, I'm the same. Well, we're told that a lot of people love to watch podcasts on TV. That's what we're being told. But I don't know anyone that does that. But the data suggests that people love doing it.
My kids do. I think it's maybe the generation coming through. It's weird. People sort of vilify smartphones and stuff, so we're deviating here. But I think it's relevant to books as well. They will consume some really quite interesting podcasts on their phones, but they watch them like we would have watched telly back in the day, which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I suppose if it's something that you're watching together as a family, and then you can discuss it, that's a great thing. When we're talking about like kids and screen time and things like that. Well, if you're watching like a really interesting discussion where hopefully you learn something, and then when it finishes, you discuss that with your kids, then that sounds like good screen time. So I totally get that.
I'm not trying to cling on my kids or to watching really highbrow podcasts. Like it's a lot about skincare and hair as well. So just so it's all about balance,
That's all good to know about though.
Anyway, back to everywhere. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about this. So obviously this podcast called the Creative Resistance Podcast. There are so many tales of resistance in the book. And and the need for and style of resistance changes across the time spans that you cover. So I'd love to know a little bit more about your thoughts on how the concept of identity and belonging has evolved from those early kind of localized spaces where people had to be kind of insular and localized to the sort of hyper-connected, activist-led communities that we see in Britain today.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for example, it wasn't until I think in sort of the later 20th century that people of colour could be working at Buckingham Palace and things like that. And there was an unofficial colour bar operating in Britain at like social venues and working men's clubs until like 1984, which is just the maddest thing.
Yeah.
But I found there were throughout while researching this book, when there are spaces like the Bookbinders Club. Or if it's the Reno in Manchester, I interviewed someone that used to go to the Reno in Manchester, which was a club where during sort of 60s, 70s and 80s, where there were lots of clubs in Manchester that didn't feel friendly to people if you're from a different background. And the Reno felt like a space where anyone could go to. And a lot of people that used to go there have remarks on how, especially if you were mixed, that was a particularly friendly place to be. And Linda Brogan, who's a sort of artist and writer herself, she speaks brilliantly about the experiences of making all of these friends, these mixed friends. It felt like a sort of sanctuary in a way to all of to everything that's going on at the time. And I remember while researching the book, some brilliant staff at the National Archives, while I was researching there, they passed me documents that showed that the police in Manchester at the time was specifically targeting mixed communities, that they thought that mixed people in particular were sort of a worrisome, troublesome group of people to keep an eye on, and the activities at the Reno was something that should be monitored. And that includes Linda, who I interviewed, and all of her friends. I felt like that is that forming a community space was their way of resisting it. They had their space where they could come together and just live their lives and fall in love with each other and dance the night away and do all of the things that you love, even if perhaps authorities wish you weren't. And eventually the Reno does unfortunately get shut down. But if you read the book, there's a happy ending for other reasons where all of these friends reunite for an amazing event. But I think while reaching, but to come back to your question, is that a lot of it is about these hyperlocal groups. A lot of it is about people banding together, whether it's in Butetown, Tiger Bay in Cardiff in the sort of early to mid 20th century, which is an amazing sort of community where there's just of every nationality and background are all living together. It's not a perfect place in any way, but the way that people describe it in interviews is of somewhere that was quite spectacular and beautiful and diverse. And they, when were sort of resisting the authorities and structures in various ways as well. There's another story in there about a police chief who was walking through in the mid 20th century, walking through Tiger Bay, Butetown, David Wilson, and he sees all of this diversity around him essentially, and thinks this is an issue that we need to get rid of.
That's an issue.
And he starts trying to push for the kind of laws that you'd have in countries like South Africa, where you would segregate people, where you would move these people away. But in fact, there's a fascinating turn in him where, while he starts pushing for this, and there are sections of the local media at the time that support him, and you can read those newspaper articles, he then gets drafted into the war. He goes off to fight in Europe, but he comes back and he's had a complete change of heart, and he's realized that he was fighting against the Nazis, who stand for all of the things that he was sort of having his opinions for. By fighting for the Allies, you're supposed to be fighting against segregation, right? And that's the mad thing when the Americans are coming into the Bookbinders Club and they're saying, get these mixed black and Asian people out of this jazz club. It's like, you're supposed to be fighting for the opposite of what you're saying
to
right
stop
now.
that happening on a grand scale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You are risking your life to fight and get for values of that these people should be allowed to be here. And then so David Wilson, when he goes away and fights the Nazis and comes back, he realizes that he was wrong and drops all of his prejudices and actually becomes a member of a mixed family in time as well, which is quite an amazing turn.
You mentioned the word community a lot there, and I think I've explored loads of topics on this podcast, and when it comes to creative resistance or resistance of any type, I think community is absolutely the one sort of thing, the one constant that comes up, and the importance of people having a space where they feel safe, where they can work together to achieve a common goal. And I think it's really important, definitely. Some great examples of that in the book as well. You mentioned at the start, and the audience will have heard in the intro as well, that you are also a filmmaker. You know, you've worked for some absolute titans, BBC, Netflix, Channel 4. I'm always fascinated by people's creative process, and whether it changes when doing different types of work. So I'd love to know a little bit more about whether your documentary filmmaking instincts shaped the way that you approach writing the book, and whether the process was the same, similar, or totally different.
Yeah, no. So I love working in documentaries. That's my day job. That's what pays the rent. And I've been really lucky to work with some amazing people along the way. I used to work at Louis Theroux's company, and I mentioned earlier that I worked for Grain, which is a fantastic production company that wants to make films that create some kind of positive action and change in the world, but are entertaining as well. And the Grain have won 2 Oscars along the way, and I love working with people there. But documentaries that I've worked on in the past. So one of them that I developed was about Linford Christie. It's a feature documentary for the BBC about Linford Christie, and as much as it is about sports documentary and about his legacy, it is also about the media and the way that race was portrayed at the peak of his powers. Don't want to get into it too deep, but we all remember the horrific way that the media would write about Linford when he's being an incredible athlete, and the things that they focused on instead. Which is one of the documentaries I made, but also one of my favorite documentaries was one that I developed called Striking with Pride, which was essentially the documentary version of the 2014 film Pride, with Bill Nighy and Dominic West and Andrew Scott. Which if you're not familiar with it, I'd encourage you, if you feel like laughing and crying and just feeling great about the world, go watch Pride from 2014. It's a brilliant film set during the 80s, during the miners' strike. And a group of lesbian and gay activists in London decide that they want to ally with the striking miners in a small South Wales village, because they see themselves as also being sort of under the boot of Thatcher's government. And they do these amazing fundraising things. But while these 2 disparate communities are very different in lots of ways, they also have lots of things that bring them together. And it's basically about the friendship between...
I've not seen that. I'll make a point of watching that. Sounds
it's
great.
Amazing. It's a true story. And these lesbian and gay activists constantly going to this village in South Wales, and they all become friends. And it's all about solidarity, essentially. And basically, I developed the documentary version of that for Sky, and it meant like finding all of those activists and finding the various members of the mining community in South Wales and reuniting them in real life as well. And we got a Welsh choir in it, and if you watch they all get up and sing in the Welsh choir together. And I loved that documentary. So Striking with Pride on Sky, go watch that. But to answer your question, which I'm rambling again,
no, it's really interesting stuff, man. Really interesting.
Answer your question. Absolutely. Because I started by being a journalist, writing for magazines and newspapers, then moved into documentary, and now I've written this book. And it's the same set of skills to do all different kinds of nonfiction storytelling. And it's all about researching and writing and interviewing and speaking. And that's what I just love that so much. I guess I'm just a little bit nosy, but it's just like, I just love hearing about other people's lives and experiences and learning about history. And I can't believe that there's, by doing these jobs that you get to do that. And it's such a privilege to be able to build these relationships with people. And, while writing this book, Deborah, who's in the middle of the book, for those that don't know, Deborah is one of the GI babies, where during the war, over 200,000 American GIs come through, thousands of whom are African American Black GIs, and lots of them fell in love with or lust with British women. A result were thousands of mixed race babies, who sometimes those men would be sent off to fight in the war. They didn't even realize that they had any babies. Wow. And these children were born, and lots of them were given up then and put into the care system. And Deborah's story is about a orphanages in the southwest of England, where 20 of these babies were growing up in this orphanage, not realizing that they just thought that was normal life, not realizing that they're in the care system. And Deborah's story is an amazing, moving one, and where we actually worked together to track down. I helped her a little bit to reconnect with her American family that she'd never known. And building a relationship with Deborah over 4 or 5 years, that's 100% part of documentary making as well, is that when you're making documentaries with people, you build these relationships. While they are contributors to it and you're, a professional, you build bonds with them and you really care about them and you feel like a duty of care to them. And I think that's the same kind of work, whether it's in documentaries or writing this book. It's about, you're telling people stories and you've got to do so with care and sensitivity, and you've got to represent them properly, but also bring out the parts of it that are hopeful and joyous, and if potentially funny in parts as well, like represent their experience in all its multitudes sensitively and correctly. And Deborah, I think the reason I brought her up is because she was the first person I interviewed out of the almost 50 people. And when 2021 is when we first spoke, and then she eventually was reunited with her family in 2024. And then this book was obviously published just last month in June 2026. And there's this long journey that we've sort of been on together. And Deborah's actually now writing a memoir about her experiences. So if anyone's interested, I very much encourage you to look up Deborah Pryor and her memoir when that comes out, because she's had the most incredible life story, which is told in miniature in this book. But if you want all the other details, I would encourage you to do that. But yeah, it's ultimately all about relationships and building trust with people. And I'm sure you must find that as well. You work on 2 podcasts, Scott. I mean, people need to trust you. I mean, you're a lovely man, so that's why people.
I think I maybe share your trait of being nosy as well. But there's also just something fascinating about chatting to people that, just it's all about stories, isn't it? I mean, that's why I write. It's why I do the podcast. I think the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we use to make sense of our place in the world are just so important. And I think I've waffled on about this to death, so apologies to anyone who's bored of this already. But I think the ability to tell stories and give meaning to stories, I think, is the big differential between us and other animals. Whether that's kind of myths, whether it's religion, whatever people think of, it's all about storytelling. And I think, that's the books that I love to read and the kind of things I like to consume are about that too. And that's what I found so magical about Everyone Everywhere. You've managed to tell all these individual stories, but I think the book as a whole kind of has a much bigger meaning, book as a result of that and all those kind of threads that tie it together. And there's some of them that definitely, like you just said about Deborah, that feel like they need to be told in more depth as well. Is that something that you're interested in, or is your job catching these snapshots? Like, do you think you'll expand on any of the stories that are in there in the future?
I've a few people that have read the book have messaged me, which I very much love. So if anyone here buys the book and please reach out to me. I love talking with people about it. A few people have messaged me saying like some of these stories feel like movies. Some of these, there's stories in there, such as about Noor Inayat Khan, who is a mixed woman who was living in Paris and has to evacuate, and then she joins the Secret Service and is then parachuted back into Paris as a sort of spy, sort of working to fight back against the Nazis, and spectacular stories like that. Well, there has been a documentary on the BBC, which is very good, which I recommend, about Noor's story, and I think there's one on PBS in America as well. There's not been a scripted one that I'm aware of, and I just feel like that is a movie. So absolutely, I would love for these to be explored in more depth, because ultimately, to go back to something I said at the start, is that lots of these, especially the historical figures, they feel like they're part of a story and a history that we've neglected a little bit. And if people were interested if you read this and then you thought, I want to go and write that script about that amazing historical figure, that would make my life. That would make my life. I would love people to explore it in more depth if there was if an opportunity came up for them. Because there's so many incredible stories here, but I'd love them to have sort of wider appreciation. I should preface that by saying that there are some amazing writers that have written biographies about lots of these figures as well. So there are there are lots of great books out there, but yeah, 100%. I'd love that, Scott. Scott, maybe you should do it.
Yeah, maybe. Probably not. I'm about to move house. Let's get through that first. Definitely.
Yeah, you're busy, man.
What's next for you? Have you got another book in you? You focus on documentary making. What comes next?
Yeah, the relentless grind of documentary development goes on. That's my day job. So my day job is just to think of new documentaries that we could
That's
make.
Pretty cool, man.
So as soon as I get off this podcast, I'm going to make my wife some breakfast and then and get to work on doing that. And I'd absolutely love to write more books. I have lots of ideas. Actually, the publisher, the very nice publisher, Will Atkinson, the publisher of this book in Wilton Square, who published Everyone Everywhere, he very kindly took me out for a dinner the other day. But then he probably regretted it because I ended the dinner by pitching him 5 different ideas for books. So we're having a lovely chat for ages. And then in the end, I just went in on hardcore pitching mode, which must have been so boring for him. I'd love to write more books. But a big part of writing more books is did anyone want to even read the first one? You know, that you do get. There's how does the book perform?
Yeah,
and that's why I hope if you're listening to this and some of the stories that you've heard, if they pique your interest in any way, please consider getting a copy. It's just £15. Just £15 for a hardback. That is a good deal.
That's a good deal.
And please consider getting a copy, or from the library or anything like that. Giving it a go, and because I'd love to write more, but can only do so if people buy this one.
I think it's important that people do buy it for sure. And also, there's a good pal of mine who has a book coming out soon, who's been on the podcast, Gemma Kearney. And there's some parallels between the two books, actually. In that her book, The Mortal Sisterhood, is the story of 12 women from across history, and it's telling their stories in depth. So a similar sort of thing, the sort of series of portraits coming together. She was sharing a thing on social media the other day about how there's a discrepancy between book sales for Black writers and white writers, and that the sales of books written by Black writers are falling faster. So again, I think it's shining a light in that sort of systemic, bigger structural injustice and prejudice that's potentially there. So I think it's really important that not only people buy books in general, but buy books like this that are actually, beating the drum for positivity and hope and inclusiveness.
Absolutely, and sharing different kinds of stories, and sharing different kind of historical stories. And I think by threading all of these 21 stories together, you tell a bigger story about who we are and about British identity. And it's not, you don't have to be mixed to read this book. If you're just fascinated by British history and people, then I'd encourage you to give it a go. It's great stories. That are thrilling to learn about and read. But then you get something else from it. And that's why I love nonfiction, working documentaries and writing this book. And, I've worked in newspapers and magazines. And I just love true stories. I just love that they are entertaining and educational at the exact same time. That's the ultimate 100%. Win-win.
Where do people get in touch with you, Lucas? How do people hit you up and let you know what they're thinking of the book and find out what you do next?
On Instagram and all other social media platforms. And my email is also very easy to find. Please, if you read this book or you listen to this podcast and you want to talk in any way, please write to me. I reply to every single message that I get. Not that I get that many, but if I do, I have had some from people I don't know, and I've loved that so much, like having conversations with new people because they've read the book and it's sparked some sort of thought in them, or something moved them, or they disagreed with something. I love engaging with people about it. So please get in touch with me.
Listen, thank you so much for taking the time, especially so early in the morning where you are, to chat through the book. Thank you for writing the book in the first place. Really do appreciate it, and I've really loved having this conversation. So cheers, Lucas.
Oh no, Scott, thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this podcast and putting all of these amazing people together. I'm so grateful that you do this and create like platforms and spaces for people to discuss these kinds of things. You're a lovely man with a beautiful voice. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, thank you, mate. Thank you.